My mom taught me to sell at a spaza shop. She ran a hair salon. I pretty much learned entrepreneurship from my mom's.
Umntu ngumntu ngabantu. That on your own, you can't really do it. You need the support of those around you.
You will have a network of people, a network of communities, and a society that will make sure that you count.
Good evening and welcome to a very, very exciting episode of SAITA StraightTalk. SAITA StraightTalk is a series of panel discussions where we talk about all things relevant to the informal sector. Some of them refer to economics, sometimes we celebrate, sometimes we berate, but for the most of it, we just tackle the issues that we think are important for our informal traders to get the best out of life. I promise you that with every session of SAITA StraightTalk, the panel discussions that are powered by the South African Informal Traders Alliance, we talk to specialists in the areas of the subject matter for the theme of the evening. We think about names like Chanti Rhodes, we think about Lil Wayne, and lots of other very, very important and celebrities that are really, really doing so well in their field of expertise. But these are people with epilepsy. And tonight we're going to talk about just how epilepsy affects us as South Africans and the roles that we have to play. My guest this evening is Charlene Castle from Epilepsy South Africa. Charlene, a very, very warm welcome and thank you for joining us on SAITA StraightTalk. Please, will you just introduce yourself and give a little bit of background on Charlene and who she is?
Okay. Good evening, Louise, and to your audiences, and thank you for having me. And it's just lovely. I've really been looking forward to this evening. So a little bit about me. I'm the National Director of Epilepsy South Africa. We're a NGO, I'm sure as everybody knows. We're the only organization in South Africa that focuses solely on epilepsy. And a little bit about me is that I am a person with epilepsy. I've suffered my whole life. I've lived with this neurological disorder. My family has worked around it and has certainly learned about epilepsy firsthand. And I've had tens and tens of grand mal seizures, many, many, many petit mals, and my epilepsy doesn't define me. My epilepsy is, I'm a person with epilepsy. I'm not an epileptic. So I think that's important to really note, Louise. And I am who I am today because of my epilepsy.
So, you know, tonight's show for me is a very, very personal one. I was in matric and my brother was 16 years old. We were at school and suddenly the teachers came running into my classroom looking for me and I couldn't understand why. And my brother at the age of 16 had his first grand mal seizure ever. We didn't know that he was epileptic. I was at school. I'm the eldest in my household, and I had to manage with the teachers. We got him to Grootskeur Hospital, and within the next 2 hours, he had 3 more grand mal seizures. And as you can imagine, for somebody that has never, ever experienced this, we've heard about it. And you know the old wives' tales of take a spoon and put it in the mouth and all of those. Yeah. It certainly didn't make sense that day. Up until this day, and he sadly passed on last year, up until this day, we still don't know where the epilepsy stemmed from. In the community that we live, and for him being a 16-year-old teenager, you know, where the image is everything, I'm very happy to say that he was surrounded by a group of friends who didn't laugh at the illness. In fact, they rallied around him. Yeah. But the reality for a lot of us is that it isn't so. So I want to start off by saying to you, are people born with epilepsy and does it take a while to manifest and something triggers it? Or is it something that can set on at any given time.
So Louise, thank you. And thank you for sharing your story. It certainly, I only started sharing my story 8 years ago and being able to talk about my life with epilepsy. So epilepsy is a neurological disorder, and I think that's the first thing we need to say. It's a neurological disorder where abnormal electrical discharges occur in the brain. And these may be triggered by structural abnormalities or chemical imbalances. And there is no point at a person's life that epilepsy, their first epileptic seizure, can't happen. Every single person could have a seizure. And it can start at birth, absolutely. It could start as a teenager. There are many, many, many reasons why epilepsy develops in somebody. And there's no one blanket answer, Louise, to your question. It's a complex question. It could have been hormone changes as a teenager. It could have been a head injury when he was playing sport, or it could have been somebody was in a car accident. Epilepsy there's a lot about it that is not known. And there's a lot about it that the neurologists and the neurology fraternity, and certainly we are always learning about epilepsy.
So I want to, we talk to the informal traders, and that's really the reason why we have these panel discussions. So I want you to just go onto this mind journey with me. I'm sitting at the market, and I might never have had, and suddenly I collapse. And when I wake up again, people tell me that I've had a seizure. How does one deal with it? You've got personal experience of that. Talk to me about what goes through your mind. What does your body feel like after a seizure, especially a grand mal? I'm going to go to petite malls because a lot of them you don't actually know, because I've got a close family member also that suffers that. And the only reason why we knew is because she would be talking to us and suddenly she'd be staring and then she's back. And it was only after a while that we picked up that it was also a form of epilepsy. So epilepsy manifests itself quite differently. But let's talk about the one that really catches the attention, and that is the one where somebody really has a seizure. What do I feel like afterwards?
Louise, it is the most, it's extraordinary, because every one of the seizures I've had has had very, very similar senses and feelings when I have come around. And the first thing is that when the seizure is over, tremendous disassociation, tremendous disorientation. So not knowing where one is. It depends on the severity and the size of the grand mal that you've also had. There's been times where I've had a grand mal seizure that, similar to your brother, that I would have multiple grand mal seizures. And then coming around takes a lot longer. The reorientation of knowing my name, of knowing the people around me, of knowing where I am, and that consciousness can take time. I've had family members sitting around me going, Charlene, do you know who we are? And that happened with my mom and dad quite a number of times. So every seizure is different. Petit mals are different. So your grand mals, you'll experience the disorientation, the disassociation. You might have soiled yourself. Your whole body is absolutely just exhausted from the electrical currents that have surged through your body. And it certainly takes quite a while, depending on, again, on the size of the grand mal, to recover. It can take up to a full 2 weeks for all your brain activity to re-trigger back to normality. So often you see people that have grand mal seizures that in those 2 weeks, their learning, their reading has taken a knock. Their spelling has taken a bit of a dive. We see it in children that we need tremendous acceptance and understanding from their teachers and their peers, like you said, in order to assist somebody post a grand mal seizure. And, Louise, I think what's important is also to say just because you've had one seizure does not mean you have epilepsy. It's one of the diagnoses is that repeated seizures, it's repeated different types of seizures, whether it's a partial seizure, petit mal seizure, whichever the names, or grand mal seizure. It is in the duplicity of them.
And what happens before the time? Do you feel differently? Because I had a sense that I could look at my brother back then and I would know this morning you don't look the same. And strangely enough, a few hours later, he would have that. As life progressed, he got to a point with certain medications that he could actually say, guys, I'm not feeling well. I feel something coming on. And he would be able to go and lie down and thus make sure that he didn't get as hurt. Because, I mean, the dangers are there. If you just fall and have a seizure, that you could get hurt badly.
Yeah.
But I'm interested to know, is there something inside of you that feels differently, that sometimes you might not listen to that inner voice, or what happens before the time?
So you're asking me personally about my experiences, correct?
Yes.
So while I was growing up, there was never a time that I had any warning to a grand mal seizure. There was absolutely no warning. I would just literally have a grand mal seizure. And those were always very, very traumatic for everyone around me.
They are.
It's very traumatic. There's no ways of preparing yourself. There's no ways of preparing anyone around your surroundings to experience or witness somebody having a grand mal seizure. Mm. The petit mals also, there were triggers. You know, there were certainly triggers, like if I wasn't having enough sleep, and even today, if I don't have enough sleep, I am at risk of having a seizure. If I spend too much time on a screen, I get terrible, terrible fatigue, and it puts me at risk. So the last 5 years, I've had in excess of 80 grand mal seizures, and it just escalated for no rhyme or reason. And it's going to sound really strange, Louise, to you and probably all your listeners. Some people with epilepsy have what we call as auras. And for some reason, in the last 5 years, I developed auras. So today, I'm very fortunate in that I have about a minute to know that I've got a grand mal coming on. I always have a certain medical prescribed drug around with me, always on my desk or on my necklace, or I have a little locket that in that minute I know to pop in under my tongue. And it's got to a point where I can actually say to whoever I'm with is, I'm going to have a grand mal seizure. I lie down, put myself into a safe position that I know I'm safe. And I'll say to them, just sit with me, keep my airways open. I will come around, and I have the grand mal seizure. So I know it sounds quite weird because I'm blessed to have auras where before I wasn't. So having a grand mal seizure and not driving became a really large thing in my life. Having petit mals and silly things like playing netball at school, having a petit mal and waking up on the side of the field holding the ball because I'd walked off with the other referee blowing and blowing and blowing the whistle. But everybody understood, and I stayed at a mainstream school. So I think it's very, very difficult to say what is that moment when a person knows they're going to have a grand mal seizure. A lot of people have auras and a lot of people don't. And like you say, some people, some family members, just know that your family member or friend isn't quite okay today. And that sensitivity is a sensitivity of often, as a person with epilepsy, we don't know that is how we are that day. So the reliability of loved ones is very, very important.
I've seen some stats, and I'm not sure how recent they are because Google's gone quite funny nowadays with the dates that they have. But I've read somewhere that in excess of 500,000 South Africans have epilepsy. Is that a factual stat, or is there still a huge part of the population that suffers from epilepsy but haven't gone through the proper medical care and has been diagnosed as such?
So, Louise, again, a very complex question, because we know 1 in 100 people in South Africa have epilepsy. How accurate the 500,000 is, we only know that number about the individuals that have actually been treated and the individuals registered at clinics to collect their medication. That can't be discounted, that there's so many, the other individuals that haven't gone for help because of, or haven't gone for medication, or haven't seen a clinic. We can't account for them. But what we do know is that 1 in 100 people in South Africa are living with this neurological disorder. And it's National Epilepsy Week this week. So we know that globally 50 million people live with epilepsy. And this whole year is about promoting that and walking for consciousness and being aware that those 50 million people, or 1 in 100 in South Africa, live with this chronic neurological disorder that needs management. So it's that care, that awareness, that understanding, that education, destigmatization, Louise, is critical in South Africa. And that's something that I am so passionate about.
Yeah, I mean, that was going to be my next question, because urban legends are, if you get a seizure, there must be something wrong with you. There must be some witchcraft. It's all this guy, stay away from that person because they're going to bring harm to you, or there's devils and stuff, all of those things.
Yeah.
How do we then tackle just the whole destigmatization of it? Because how do you convince somebody that has literally heard this about other people in the community forever, and then one day wakes up and maybe a child or a spouse has this, and now this is somebody I've loved, and suddenly this person is displaying what I believe is witchcraft.
So this destigmatization is really, really important. And I wish it was just urban legend. You use that word and my whole heart goes, I wish it was that, because you then went into the current scenario of somebody waking up with somebody in their home with epilepsy and having had a seizure. So we are consistently educating and talking about what epilepsy is. The International Bureau of Epilepsy for Africa has many, many speakers, as we do, that are actual sangomas and that actually talk online and share their experience and address the stigmas, because it's still believed that it still is believed that it is a spirit that enters the body that needs to be exorcised. Yeah. And that is really sad, because the more seizures somebody has, the more at risk of brain damage that they actually are. So the sooner that person can get medical assistance or get to somebody that can assist and diagnose, the better. But it's about education. It's about discussing it. It's about being unashamed to discuss it. And, a truth that always sits with me is to say, we live in a country that we refer to ourselves as a rainbow nation. And our constitution speaks about persons with disability as having a disability, with having equal rights. And I think it's really important to know that we do celebrate our differences. And one of our differences when we're a person with epilepsy is that we have an invisible disability. And that destigmatization right there is what we need to be unafraid to discuss. Yeah. And the more open platforms we have like this, and the more people we reach to have these conversations, it's not something to be ashamed of. Epilepsy is manageable. Does it require medication? Absolutely. Do you need to manage your sleep, manage your stress, watch what you eat, and do all those good things in a healthy lifestyle anyway? Yes, but probably a little bit more consciously than the next person. Celebrate our differences and live that as South Africans.
I want to ask you, though, with the exception of, and I know there are people that suffer epileptic attacks so frequently that they actually have helmets and things on to protect their heads, but most people don't. Is epilepsy considered a disability? Which means if I have a form and I have epilepsy and it asks me for disability, Can I tick yes?
You can. Any form will always say yes or no, either, or I prefer not to disclose. And I think you're opening a whole another conversation here, because you're going to lead into employment and job applications.
Yes. Yes.
So and the whole discrimination that happens in the workplace. So the answer is multi-tongued. You're asking a lot, but living with a helmet is multiple grand mal seizures, brain abnormalities, brain damage would abound in that level of grand mal seizures, and being consistently in electrical current or electrical state within the brain that just doesn't know any different, is not functioning normally anymore. In terms of disclosure, I think it's discretionary. I think you need to make the informed decision. And it really is a tough one in our climate today, because we know statistically due to COVID, 50% of our population is unemployed now. So I think that becomes a really scary statistic in itself, because somebody that hasn't been employed for a long time, they're going to do a job application, and they're likely not to disclose, Louise. They're likely to leave that out because they're hungry, because they're battling, because they haven't. You hear it on the radio stations every day, like the thrill of getting a job after being unemployed for 12 months. And they're heartwarming stories. I think what is really, and not what I think, what is critically important as a person with epilepsy is, when you apply for a job, know that you can manage it. Know that it's a job that is not going to jeopardize your life or anybody else's life. Know that it's a job that you can do is really, really important, because if you can't do it, you're going to create more stress for yourself. You're going to get into a cycle of seizures, and you're going to lose your job. So that self-care and that self-understanding is really important. But as I say, it is up to each person to disclose, Louise. It's such a personal decision that. And it depends on the severity as well of what level of epilepsy you have.
Yeah. I want to go back to the medication, and like I said earlier, a grand mal seizure, you'll know. But then petite mal seizures aren't all, like you said, you walked off the netball court. My little niece she just stood in a conversation. She would stand, she would be talking, and suddenly it would just be like she's taking a pause, but her eyes would give her away. And then 3-4 seconds later, she's back, and all she'll say is, "What was I saying again?" So she was not even aware of it herself. So what kind of medication is there? When I go to the doctor, I mean, you also said earlier, it's the repetitive seizures that makes it epilepsy. So if I got it once, should I go to the doctor, or is it maybe I was just overly stressed, or maybe I just knocked my head, or shouldn't something like this be worthy of a doctor anyway? And bear in mind that the majority of who's watching us this evening are people that have to sit in a queue at a public healthcare place. Yeah. So what happens?
My advice is, one, petit mals, yes, there are absences. And again, it goes to people around you. And yes, you learn to manage them. You learn to pause. You learn to speak slower, so that they become less and less obvious to those people around you. They are also managed with medication. I think the moment when you do go to see a doctor and you stand in that 4 or 5 hour clinic is when you really, and the people around you know that you're really not okay, and this is just too repetitive. Remember, petit mals can also be people without epilepsy. When they're tired, you're just talking to somebody and they're just not there. You can have somebody who's got a headache who suffers from migraines, as an example, who's just not present when you're talking. So I think it's really, you've got to know, and I had somebody at a talk yesterday that I spoke at, and she said to me, I have migraines. I often fall asleep after them. I do soil myself. I feel very tired. My body's very stiff. My mouth is sore. And I said to her, well, how many times has this happened in the last few months? She says, oh, no, often. Will you please see a neurologist? Okay. So I think, or go to the local clinic that you've got access to. So I think again, petty moles and absences are very different. You've got to know, again, you're looking at people around you, because you don't know, Louise. You don't remember when you had an absence. You just miss a moment and you carry on talking. And growing up, my mom would pinch me and I would come out of it so fast. And I'm not advocating at all that that's what anyone should do.
Look, moms would know what to do.
It was never hard. It was never, but my subconscious used to go, okay, and I would move out the way and it would click me out. So, but she also is a nurse, and she also understood epilepsy on a far deeper level because of her medical background. So, every person with epilepsy is different. There's no cookie cutter on this.
Yeah. Let's talk about medication. There's obviously a whole variety of medication that your healthcare practitioner can put you on. But is this something that you take forever? I.e., is there a cure? Do we get to a point where we can say, I've been on this treatment for 6 months or for a year, I'm okay?
I think if you ask any person with epilepsy, when they go for a period of number of months and they're on medication without a seizure, they'll go, I'm fine. They'll stop their medication, and surprise, a few weeks later, they have another seizure. It's the nature of the illness and the nature of the neurological disorder. I often fall back into that, but we talk about it as a neurological disorder. No, it doesn't. There isn't a cure for it. It might go, you may not have seizures for a long time because you're managing your health in a more manageable way, and everything keeps those brain waves and those chemicals and the charges calmer. But I never, ever just stop your medicine. Your doctor that you're seeing and you're consulting with might say, look, we can put you on lesser dosage because you've been clear for so long. And generally, you need to be, I think I stand corrected, I think you need to be seizure-free for 2 years before you can even, you need to, it's a long period of time. You cannot just stop your medication. It's just not, it's not possible. And the conversations around stigmatization and also wanting not to acknowledge you have epilepsy is, I think that's a whole nother conversation, because all of us have rebel spirits. All of us as teenagers did things that were naughty, did things that you knew you weren't supposed to do, but you're going to do them anyway. Now, you compound that with having epilepsy and having to take your medication at a certain time every day. You go through all your hormone changes. You become a young adult. Whatever the circumstances are, you then, one of the things you rebel against is taking your medicine. And lo and behold, you have seizures. So it's not something you can entertain in terms of not stopping once you have epilepsy, unless under medical supervision. You're just jeopardizing yourself. You really, really, really are.
Yeah. So that's from the person who has the condition. So let's go back to the market. I'm sitting under my umbrella. I'm busy doing my sales for the day. And a customer comes, and while we're talking, this person goes into a seizure. Often our markets aren't equipped. There's seldomly an ablution facility. There's seldom fresh running water. What do I do to assist somebody that has just had a seizure?
First thing you do is don't panic and don't run away. That's the very first thing, because that person needs help. The biggest thing, and you mentioned earlier about the old thing about sticking a spoon in the mouth or a finger to hold the tongue, or don't do that. Your everything goes to spasm. The very first thing is put the person on their side, pull their knees up a little bit so that they're softened and bent. Hold the arm that's on the side just over in place, and sit with the person and keep talking to them. And even though their eyes are rolling, even though they're not there, they're not present, their brain is in an absolute spasm. Your brain goes into an absolute spasm through a seizure. Just keep talking to them. And you may not know their name. You just keep talking to them, and you wait for them to come around. And just you say, you're safe. This is where you are. I'm with you. Keep breathing. You're going to be fine. And you just talk that person through it. Depending again on the size of the seizure, if it's a 5-minute grand mal seizure or a 1-minute grand mal seizure or 30 seconds, depends how long it will take that person to come around. They may need just to sit up quietly and have some water when they are ready. You don't try and lift them up. You don't try and move them. You just make them safe. If you've got a jacket, put it under their head, because you don't want a person having a seizure banging their head. It just is going to, first of all, anyone who bangs their head is really, it's sore. Mm-hmm. And with the spasms, you need to just hold that person in that space and make them safe. And don't panic. Have your emotional moment afterwards, but just call for help. If there are people around you and you don't feel like you're coping, ask somebody to stop and help you. If you're a smaller woman and it's a really big guy stature, get somebody to help you, because you need to keep them safe. What you're doing is keeping the airways open by putting them on their side to prevent suffocation.
Okay. And that the same would go for families, and for whether it's a baby or whether I'm a teacher at an ECD center, I would have to do the same thing for a little one, isn't it?
Exactly the same. And, you know, I think the debrief of somebody who's managed a seizure post the event and post the person with epilepsy being stable or comfortable or, again, orientated, is really important to have the conversation at a later stage with, because it does impact emotionally. But keep the person safe, put them on the side. A lot of people call ambulances. Some ambulances will arrive, and we know in South Africa some don't. And I think also, you know, people that just stop their medication are at really high risk of having seizures. Parents that are in denial will just stop their kids' medication, and then the seizures start. So I can just say to you, if your child has been diagnosed with epilepsy, please don't stop their medication. Just understand that it's a neurological disorder that needs management.
So it's Epilepsy Awareness Week. What can, I'm not affiliated to Epilepsy SA. Most of our viewers won't be. What little bit can we do in terms of helping the cause and spreading the awareness?
So I think that the first thing is become members of our organization. You can mail membership@epilepsy.org.za, or you can mail info@epilepsy.org.za, and we share information. We can share a lot of information. We call them toolkits. We've got do's and don'ts. We've got first aid posters, and you can really use those to get into your communities. Enable yourself with a little bit of information that you can talk and teach the people around you about how to manage a seizure, because the reality is it's going to happen to someone that you know. Look, if you look at the statistics. So we have social workers and social development teams around the country. We are in 6 provinces. Soon we are in a 7th province. The branches are in the process of separating out. So we're in 7 provinces, and our social development teams work in the outlying areas. So by getting hold of us, we are able to offer, there is coaching, there's counseling, not coaching, there's counseling, there's support infrastructures for the people of South Africa with epilepsy and their families. And often that's the best way to do it, is access the support, access that. People with epilepsy need to know that they have a place that they can belong, and a place that who they are is understood. And that's really, if anybody can do anything, Louise, that is the ongoing conversations.
Please just give us the contact details for Epilepsy SA again. I'll give you some free advertising space here, please.
Use info@epilepsy
Okay, wonderful.
Or go to our website. We've got a library full of documents, a library full of reading. And really, those are free in the public domain, and use all those resources. They're at your fingertips. They're available. So yeah, that's we're very proud of our organization. We've got amazing branches. We have people who come and do work at our branches on a daily basis. We call them day visitors. And we've got residents that actually live with us full time, and that we have social workers, we have nurses, we have full facilities. So we really are a large organization that's been around since 1967.
What an amazing story. What an amazing story. And your endeavor to give support to people with epilepsy and their families.
Absolutely. We work very closely with government, with the different departments. World Health Organization has actually recently passed a resolution specifically talking to epilepsy. So in the years to come, it hopefully is included in all our documentation and recognized from Parliament all the way down, and large national education programs are rolled out more and more as we go. And that's what Epilepsy South Africa is about, is teaching South Africa about epilepsy.
In closing, Charlene, the one thing that I do know, if I look at you, I mean, you started off the show by saying you live with epilepsy. I want you to give a message of hope, because if I look at you, I see a wholesome, beautiful, intelligent woman. And there's no reason anybody should shy away from it, only because of that condition. So please leave a message of hope for not only people that are sitting thinking, I might have this condition and I'm too afraid to address it or to tell my family, but also for family members that are sitting, or it might be my neighbor that I know is going through something like that. Please just give us a message of hope.
My message of hope goes like this: celebrate each other's differences. And what I've learned is I have learned resilience. I've learned courage. I've learned self-belief. I've learned that I'm a person way before than an epileptic. And I become a person with epilepsy. And my message of hope is that celebrate the differences. Understand that this surpasses color, this surpasses languages. We are people, and people are different. And I can't tell you, the more you're doing that, and you're asking me for a message of hope. My biggest thing is be kind. If you see somebody in need, stop and help. If you do one little thing of kindness, you are going to make a difference. And it's like a pond. You drop a little stone in, you never know how wide that ripple goes. So the hope is, there is hope. Epilepsy is manageable, and having a wholesome, balanced life is absolutely possible. It is not an illness, a neurological disorder that stops your world. It's just another challenge that we live with that needs management. So be kind and celebrate differences, South Africa.
Yeah, no, look, and if there's one thing we as South Africans do well, is we beat challenges. So if you have been wondering, something's wrong and I'm not too sure, and you think it is epilepsy, please contact Epilepsy SA or your nearest healthcare practitioner. But there is hope, and let's live. Be kind, as Charlene says. From me, Louise, until next time from SAITA StraightTalk this evening, it's thank you and goodbye.
Thank you for having me. Take care, everybody.